Some minds don't sleep, they remember.
There is a shadow that humanity once feared, lurking in the cold winds of the black night, a faceless, voiceless entity, carrying death in every silent breath. That is Yersinia pestis. Its name is like a hoarse curse, echoing from the Middle Ages, awakening nightmares humanity thought it had buried. Modern cities, with their frenetic pulse and streams of cars like lifeblood, cannot escape it. It arrives not with the roar of war or flames, but through a tiny bite, gentle, yet enough to sow terror. Some hear the wail of ambulance sirens and think it's someone else's tragedy. Some remain indifferent, believing themselves untouchable amid the urban glow, and some never realize until that shadow knocks at their door. Yersinia pestis, in your eyes, is what? A distant memory of death? A warning of life's fragility? Or a mirror reflecting humanity's arrogance, always believing it can conquer all? Until it faces an invisible foe? Join us in the story of this silent plague, where history and the present intertwine, like a songbook chilling and awakening about ourselves. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to catch more gripping and haunting stories. The first rat. Let's go back in time to the year 1900, the city of San Francisco. Forget the image of the iconic Golden Gate Bridge you often see. It hadn't been built yet. Imagine a port city brimming with life, a gateway for America looking out onto the Pacific, a melting pot of cultures, a place of hope, of gold, of dreams of making a new life. But along with the ships carrying silk, spices, and immigrants, came ticketless passengers, rats, millions of them. They were everywhere, under the floorboards, in the dark alleys, on the docks. They were a part of the city's landscape, an accepted nuisance. No one thought of them as biological time bombs. And hidden in the heart of San Francisco was another city, Chinatown, a maze of narrow streets, laundries, smoky eateries, herbal pharmacies, and hidden gambling dens. To outsiders, it was a mysterious world, both alluring and frightening. To the authorities, it was a neglected area, and to future epidemiologists, it was a perfect petri dish. One day in March 1900, a man named Wong Chud Kane, a lumberyard owner, suddenly fell ill. High fever, chills, body aches, and then a horrific symptom appeared. A swollen, soft, hot, and excruciatingly painful lump emerged in his groin. It was called a bubo. Wong Chud King died within a few hours. The neighbors thought it was a strange illness. The local authorities didn't bother. What was so noteworthy about a Chinese man dying in Chinatown? But they were wrong. Wong Chud King's death was noticed by one person. His name was Joseph Kenyun, a doctor with the Federal Marine Hospital Service. Kenyun was a difficult, meticulous man who believed in science above all else. He was one of America's top bacteriologists. When he heard about the suspicious death, he went immediately. Despite objections, he performed an autopsy under the microscope in the tissue sample taken from that bubo. He saw them, rod-shaped bacilli with ends that stained more darkly, looking like tiny safety pins. It was unmistakable. He had seen them in textbooks, in reports from Asia. It was Yersinia pestis. The Black Death had arrived in America. How could a medieval murderer cross an ocean and infiltrate a modern city like this? Its script was nearly perfect, a masterpiece of evolution. It was like a heist movie with three main characters. The first character, the mastermind, the bacterium Yersinia pestis itself. It is clever, ruthless, and incredibly patient. Its goal is simple: to reproduce and spread. The second character, the getaway car, the flea, a tiny blood-sucking machine. When it bites an infected host, It doesn't just drink blood. The bacteria flood its stomach and multiply. Forming a blockage, the flea becomes ravenously hungry. It bites more frantically, and with each bite, it regurgitates a mass of bacteria into the wound of a new victim. It turns into a living, disease-filled syringe. And the third, and most important character, the transport vehicle, the rat. Why rats? Because they live right alongside us. They eat our scraps, they nest in our homes, and most importantly, they travel. They boarded steamships in Hong Kong, and a few weeks later, they casually disembarked at the port of San Francisco, carrying on them the getaway cars filled with the mastermind. When a rat dies of the plague, its hungry fleas abandon the cooling corpse, and they seek out the nearest warm meal. Sometimes, that's another rat. Sometimes, it's a human. It was a deadly trio. A perfect system. Joseph Kenyon understood this. He immediately alerted the city and state authorities. He recommended a quarantine of Chinatown and a large-scale rat extermination campaign. And this is where our story shifts from a biological horror film to a political tragicomedy. The governor of California at the time, Henry Gage, upon hearing Kenyon's report, did what politicians all over the world often do when faced with an inconvenient truth. He denied it. Not only did he deny it, he launched a public campaign against Kenyon. Gage declared that there was no plague. He called it a fake plague, a conspiracy by the federal government to seize control of California. He said that Kenyon and other doctors had injected bacteria from corpses into monkeys to fake the evidence. Sound familiar? A century before the concept of fake news, Governor Gage was already a master. The local press, pulled by the strings of business owners, also joined in. They feared that news of the plague would destroy the economy, scare ships away from the port, and crash the real estate market. They called Kenyon a fear-monger. His laboratory was vandalized, his budget was cut, he was turned into an enemy of the people. And while the war between science and economic interests was raging, another, more ruthless war was being legitimized. The city government decided to act. But they didn't act based on Kenyon's infection map. They acted based on a racial map. A rope fence, and later barbed wire, was erected around Chinatown. Over 20,000 people were locked inside. Police were ordered to shoot anyone who tried to cross. And the greatest irony, the white residents who lived or worked inside the quarantine zone could get special passes from the police to come and go freely. But the Chinese residents were trapped. This was no longer a public health measure. This was a siege. An entire community was turned into a scapegoat. They not only had to face a deadly pathogen, but they also had to face another virus. A virus even more ancient and toxic. The virus of prejudice and racism. And so, the curtain falls on the first act of the tragedy. A city living in denial. A community imprisoned, and somewhere in the dark corners, the rats are still dying, the fleas are still jumping, and the invisible mastermind is still silently multiplying. Now, let's just pause for a moment. I know perhaps you're just like me, trying to find someone to trust in this story. Our minds are asking, if I were there, who would I believe? Would you believe the governor, who is trying to keep the city calm, to protect the economy from collapse? Or would you believe the lone doctor, who is spreading a terrifying truth that might be the key to saving many lives? When faced with a harsh truth, a truth that could turn everything you know upside down, what do you think your own natural tendency is? To confront it, or to find some reason to believe it doesn't exist, so that life can go on as it was? And when fear reaches its peak, is drawing the line and blaming a different group of people the way our own minds used to reassure ourselves. To feel safer, even if just for a moment. Be honest with yourself tonight. Which side would you choose to be on? Leave your thoughts in the comments. The fight against Yersinia pestis on the streets and in the labs has only just begun, and we will explore it together in the next part. The Invisible Hunt. At the end of the previous part, we left San Francisco in a state of chaotic conflict, a community besieged behind a barbed wire fence, a government stubbornly denying the truth, a lone doctor trying to awaken a city that was blindfolding itself. The war seemed to have just begun, but that was the war on the political stage, while the media spotlight and public anger were focused on San Francisco. The real hunt, the hunt for this invisible enemy, had already begun years earlier, on the other side of the Pacific. To understand the irony of Governor Gage's denial of the plague in 1900, we must travel back to Hong Kong in the year 1894. That year, the plague broke out in Hong Kong, killing thousands. The medical world was shaken. Two nations, France and Japan, sent their best bacteriologists there, with a single goal: to find the killer. On the Japanese side was a famous name, Kitasato Shibasaburo. He was equipped with a modern laboratory, a large team, and had the full support of the British authorities in Hong Kong. He was a rock star of bacteriology. On the French side was an almost unknown person, Alexander Yersin, a young, quiet doctor, a former student of Louis Pasteur. Yersin did not have a large team. He was alone, with a makeshift laboratory set up in a bamboo hut. The local authorities did not trust him. They refused to provide him with samples from the hospitals. The race began. Kitasato's team, with all their advantages, repeatedly ran into difficulties. They isolated many types of bacteria from the corpses but could not identify the main culprit. Perhaps because the bodies had been contaminated with other bacteria for too long after death. Meanwhile, Yersin, the outcast, had to resort to a less scientific method: bribery. He paid the British soldiers guarding the morgue to let him take tissue samples from the buboes of victims who had just died. In his hot bamboo hut, under his microscope, Yersin saw it, the safety pin-shaped bacillus. He succeeded in culturing it and proving it was the cause of the disease. He had found the enemy. For his humility and groundbreaking work, the bacterium was later named after him, Yersinia pestis, a victory for the underdog, for quiet persistence over power and glamour. So, the identity of the enemy had been determined, but a big question remained: how did it travel? Humans do not easily transmit the disease directly to each other. Unless it has progressed to the pneumonic form, there had to be an intermediary, an accomplice, and the hunt for this accomplice takes us to another place, India, in 1898. Another French doctor, Paul Louis Simond, was sent to Karachi to study the epidemic. He noticed something strange. Rats often died in large numbers just before a human outbreak. The locals had a saying: when the rats flee, follow them. Simond began to suspect, could it be that something was moving from the dead rats to living humans? He thought of fleas. His hypothesis was ridiculed by the medical community. Fleas? Those pesky insects. What a ridiculous idea. But Simon did not give up. He conducted one of the simplest yet most brilliant experiments in medical history. Imagine this. He took 2 glass jars. In the first jar, he placed a plague-infected rat. In the second jar, he placed a healthy rat. He connected the 2 jars, but with a wire mesh screen in between. In the first experiment, the mesh was wide enough that the 2 rats could not touch, but the fleas could pass through. The result? The healthy rat died of the plague. In the second experiment, he did the exact same thing, but this time the mesh was so fine that not even the fleas could get through. The result? The healthy rat remained perfectly fine. Bingo! Simon had found the accomplice. He had exposed the entire conspiracy of Yersinia pestis. We often romanticize scientific discoveries. We think of the eureka moment as a bolt of lightning from the heavens, but the truth is more mundane and sometimes quite disgusting. Yersin and Simon had to work in conditions we cannot imagine. They had to dissect decaying corpses in morgues without refrigeration. They had to handle rats swarming with fleas. They faced the risk of infection every day. Their work was not elegant equations on a blackboard, but blood, pus, and the smell of death. So, let's go back to San Francisco in 1900, when Dr. Joseph Kenyon saw the bacterium in his microscope. He wasn't discovering something new. He was merely confirming a fact that was already recognized by the entire scientific world. The name Yersinia pestis had been given. The role of rats and fleas had been proven. This makes Governor Gage's denial all the more ridiculous and outrageous. He wasn't just ignoring the federal doctor. He was turning a blind eye to the achievements of the world's greatest minds. He was declaring war on scientific truth itself. The invisible hunt had ended years earlier in the laboratories of Hong Kong and India. The enemy had been identified, its weapon exposed. In theory, the war could have been much easier. And so, the enemy was identified. The map leading to its heart had been clearly drawn by the greatest minds. In theory, the battle could have been over. But the scientists had found the bacterium. They could not find a vaccine for ignorance. They could not invent an antibiotic for greed and prejudice. They had won the bacteriological war, but they were about to lose the psychological war. They were about to face a virus even harder to cure than Yersinia pestis, the virus of fear and rumor. I wonder, and perhaps you're wondering too, in the fight against a pandemic, which enemy is more frightening? A microbe that we can see under a microscope, or the ghosts in the minds of our fellow humans that we can never grasp? And ironically, the thing that would cleanse San Francisco of the plague would not be an effective public health policy, but a natural disaster that was about to strike, a wrath of the earth. That leads us to tonight's final question, a question about the nature of greatness. We, in our culture, love to celebrate the eureka moments, the lightning flashes of genius, but the story of Yersin and Simon shows a different truth, a more mundane and perhaps less glamorous truth, the truth of persistence, of failure, and perhaps of a stomach strong enough to endure the smell of death. So what moment do you think truly shapes history? The brilliant flash of a genius's eye, or the thousands of hours of silent, meticulous, and sometimes foul-smelling labor behind it? What do you admire more? Leave your reflections in the comments. In the next part, we will see what happens when a city tries to bury the truth, and only a devastating earthquake can dig it up. We will step into the third part of the story. Here, the enemy is no longer the bacteria in the blood, but the fear in the mind. The plague of the mind, a curse that won't break. In the previous part, we stood in the solemn and silent space of the laboratory, where truth is distilled through microscope lenses and meticulous persistence. The scientists had found the true enemy, the bacterium Yersinia pestis. They had identified its vectors, the rats and the fleas that infested them. Logically, scientifically, the map to the enemy's lair had been drawn with clarity and precision. The path to eradicating the disease seemed wide open, but they, and all of us, were about to confront a much harsher reality in the chaotic world of human affairs. There are maps that can never be drawn with ink and ruler. This is the complex map of the mind, sketched with the crude lines of inherent fear, colored by deep-seated prejudice. and shaped by collective paranoia, and they were about to discover that when the plague of the mind erupts, it spreads with a ferocity that outpaces even the most ravenous fleas. The great amplification machine for this mental pathogen was the press, the mass media of the era. Let's use our imagination to travel back in time. You are a citizen of San Francisco in the early years of the 20th century. One morning, you pick up a newspaper, still fragrant with fresh ink. Giant headlines, designed to shock, strike you right in the eyes. Deadly plague from the Orient besieges the city. The yellow peril lurks in every shadow. Chinatown, a nest of pestilence that must be purged. Accompanying these inflammatory words were ghastly caricatures. They depicted Chinese people not as human beings, but as grotesque creatures with elongated claws and sinister, slanted eyes, gleefully spreading foul, black clouds of disease over the peaceful homes of white people. This was no longer reporting. This was the act of pouring fuel on the smoldering fire of bigotry. The media, backed by a coalition of businessmen fearful of commercial losses, politicians seeking votes from fear, and union leaders wanting to eliminate labor competition, conspired to transform a public health crisis into a racial one. They created an incredibly simple narrative, a story with clear heroes and villains. The public no longer needed to fear an invisible, complex scientific concept like a bacterium. Now, they could focus their fear on a tangible target, their own neighbors of Asian descent. And once fear was given a specific face, irrationality was officially crowned king. While Dr. Kenyun and his team were struggling in the laboratory with statistics, samples, and political pressure, out on the streets, the people were fighting the plague with their own methods guided by superstition and panic. People wore charms made of garlic around their necks, believing its pungent smell could ward off disease. They burned foul-smelling herbs in their homes to purify the air and drive away evil spirits. Many firmly believed that drinking copious amounts of whiskey would disinfect the body from the inside out, killing the pathogen before it could strike. Fear succeeded in turning neighbors and fellow merchants into potential enemies. A dry cough, a mild fever, a single sneeze was enough to draw dozens of suspicious, hostile glares. Social cohesion, which is the strongest immune system of any community, began to fracture and disintegrate rapidly. The city of San Francisco sank into a dual fever, a biological fever caused by the bacteria, and a psychological fever spread by paranoia and hatred. The situation became hopeless. The government stubbornly denied the epidemic's existence to protect the economy. Federal doctors were hamstrung by politics. The Chinatown community was isolated and made a scapegoat, and amidst all this chaos, Yersinia pestis silently claimed victory, spreading from rat to rat, from alley to alley. And then, at precisely 5:12 a.m. on April 18, 1906, when humanity had proven utterly helpless, nature itself decided to intervene. A horrific earthquake, measuring 7.9 on the Richter scale, tore the city apart. The ground roared and split open like gaping wounds. Centuries-old buildings, symbols of the city, crumbled into dust like houses of cards. But that was only the prelude to the disaster. Ruptured gas lines ignited, and a colossal firestorm, a hell on earth, swept through the city with unstoppable force. It was a tragedy beyond description. Over 3,000 people died, more than half of the city's population. Some 225,000 people lost their homes. San Francisco was almost completely wiped off the map. But amidst the absolute destruction and infinite sorrow, something strange, a cruelly ironic twist of history, occurred. That merciless inferno accomplished what no public health policy, No health campaign could. It conducted a city-wide sanitary purge. It burned to cinders the decrepit wooden tenements, the rotting old wharves, the dark, damp alleys, and the crowded slums that were the ideal breeding grounds for the bacteria. In other words, the fire destroyed the entire kingdom of the rats. When the city was rebuilt from the ashes, it was replanned with a more modern sewer system, with buildings constructed of brick and concrete instead of wood. The ideal habitat for rats was gone forever, and with the disappearance of the rat kingdom, the plague in San Francisco also nearly vanished. Nature, in an accidental and devastating tantrum, had succeeded where human wisdom and compassion had failed miserably. It was a bitter lesson in the smallness of man before greater, unfeeling forces. Do you think the story ended there? That humanity had learned its expensive lesson? Not quite. History has a sad habit of repeating itself. In 1924, nearly 2 decades later, the plague reappeared, this time in Los Angeles, a city in the midst of an explosive boom, a paradise of real estate, oil, and glamorous Hollywood dreams. And what was the first reaction of the city authorities upon discovering the initial cases? You guessed it, conceal it at all costs. They feared that news of a medieval plague would scare away the influx of migrants and wealthy investors. Collapsing the city's economic bubble, history repeated itself with astonishing accuracy. Economic interests were once again placed above the health and lives of the community. It took precious time and a great struggle from health professionals before the truth was acknowledged and control measures were implemented. The story of the plague in America in the early 20th century reveals a sad truth. We may have found the bacterium under a microscope, but we are often powerless to illuminate and treat the blind spots, the dark corners of our own minds. The plague of the mind, with its chronic symptoms of fear, prejudice, greed, and the tendency to find scapegoats, is humanity's most intractable disease. Let's pause for a moment and look at our world tonight. It's very likely that right now, in the newsfeed on your phone, there is a sensational headline, an image edited to provoke outrage, a toxic meme designed to mock and humiliate a certain group of people. And it is being shared at lightning speed. A rational part of you knows it might not be entirely true, that it could be clickbait, a deliberate exaggeration, but another, more instinctual part of you is curious, feels itself being pulled into the emotional vortex. Is that psychological mechanism, that viral spread of information, really anything new? Let's try one more time to go back to San Francisco in 1900. You're holding a newspaper, the ink still fresh. You read the headline about the yellow peril from Chinatown, accompanied by a prejudiced caricature. What would you think? Would you have enough inner strength and critical thinking to be skeptical? Or would a vague fear and peer pressure overwhelm all your reason? The medium has changed, from newsprint to the glowing screen in the palm of our hand. The speed has changed, from days for a story to spread across a city to seconds for it to circle the globe. But the fundamental nature of fear, of suspicion, and how they are exploited seems to have remained chillingly unchanged. So, in this age where information is abundant but truth is alarmingly scarce, what must you and I do to protect our minds? How can we build a mental immune system strong enough to resist these toxic informational pathogens? Please share your methods in the comments below. I truly want to listen and learn from you, because the fight against the ghosts in the mind is still here, persistent and without end. But perhaps the most interesting, most unexpected battle is the one happening right now, a quiet war in the places you least expect. The plague never really left America. It simply moved. It no longer hides in the squalid, crowded slums. It has relocated to the quiet suburbs, to the carefully manicured lawns. And this time, It hides behind the guise of creatures that are incredibly cute. Suburban Enemy. Of course, we will leave the noisy past behind and enter the silent battle of the present. The battlefield has changed, and the enemy has changed its face. In the last part, we left behind cities drowning in fear and prejudice. We saw the fire of an earthquake unintentionally become an unlikely sanitary hero. It seemed the war with the plague in urban centers was over. So where did it go? Was Yersinia pestis completely eradicated from American soil? No, it never left. It just moved. Come with me to a completely different place. A national park in the American West. A place with clear blue skies, fresh air, and majestic mountains. A place where families come to camp, to hike, and to temporarily escape the suffocation of modern life. You are walking on a trail, and you see them, a colony of chubby prairie dogs standing upright on their hind legs, looking like tiny sentinels, or a fluffy-tailed squirrel with big, round eyes, nibbling on a pine cone. What is your first reaction? Ah, so cute. You raise your camera, or maybe even take a piece of a cookie from your pocket, intending to feed it. At that moment, a park ranger might approach and gently say, "Ma'am, sir, please do not feed the wildlife. It's not good for them, and it's not good for you either." You might think that's a reminder about preserving the ecosystem, but the truth behind those words is far more terrifying. The ranger isn't just worried about the squirrel losing its foraging instincts. They are worried about you. They are worried about the fleas that might be hiding in that adorable fur. Fleas that could be carrying Yersinia pestis. Welcome to the battleground of the plague in the 21st century. It's no longer the urban plague. Now, it's the sylvatic plague. The bacteria have found a new home. A vast kingdom within the wild rodent populations in western states like Arizona, Colorado, New Mexico, and California. It exists there, in a relatively stable cycle. Prairie dogs, squirrels, kangaroo rats, rabbits, they transmit the disease to each other through fleas, forming a huge, silent reservoir of the pathogen. And humans, we are just accidental victims. A camper who unfortunately pitches a tent near an infected prairie dog colony. A child who plays with and picks up a dead squirrel. A farmer who inhales the pathogen while cleaning a barn. Every year, the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention still records an average of about 7 human plague cases. That number may seem small, but each case triggers an incredibly intense biological detective investigation. Imagine a patient admitted to the hospital with severe flu-like symptoms, fever, headache, nausea, but then a swollen lymph node appears. The doctors suspect. They send a sample for testing, and the result is positive. Immediately, the CDC's ghost hunters swing into action. They don't carry paranormal energy detectors. They carry sampling kits, animal traps, and GPS maps. They will ask the patient, "In the past 2 weeks, where have you been? Where did you camp? Did you see any dead animals?" They cordon off the suspected area, set traps to catch rodents, draw their blood for testing, and capture the fleas on them for examination. Their job is to redraw the map of the pathogen's movement, find the source of the infection, and warn the community. And sometimes, this fight against a medieval enemy is carried out with very modern and somewhat amusing methods. Public health workers will use special equipment to spray an insecticidal powder down prairie dog burrows. They don't carry flamethrowers. They carry canisters of flea-killing powder. Fortunately, we now have an ultimate weapon that Yersin and Kenyun could only have dreamed of: antibiotics. Drugs like streptomycin or doxycycline can effectively kill Yersinia pestis. If diagnosed and treated early, the survival rate for patients with bubonic plague is very high, but the word of here carries the weight of a life. If the bacteria have entered the bloodstream, causing septicemic plague, tissues will begin to necrose, the skin turning black, the origin of the name the Black Death. If it enters the lungs, causing pneumonic plague, the patient not only faces a high risk of death but can also transmit the disease directly to others through respiratory droplets. The race at that point is measured in hours. So, the enemy is still there. It's no longer a mass threat as it once was, but it has become a part of the wild ecosystem of the American West. A constant reminder of our fragility. We live in smart homes, drive safe cars, and are surrounded by concrete and technology. But the moment we step out of our car in a national park, we are in its territory, and with just one bite from a flea smaller than a pinhead, our entire illusion of safety and control can crumble. That thought, that every technological fortress we've painstakingly built could crumble because of a bite from a flea smaller than a pinhead. Does it make you feel uneasy? I feel two streams of thought battling in my own mind, and perhaps you do too. On one hand, there's the feeling of being small and afraid, the sense that we are actually very fragile, that our safety is just a thin veneer. But on the other hand, another feeling arises, a strange humility, a connection, the feeling that we are not the masters of this world, but just a part of a great, complex, and sometimes far more dangerous web of life. It makes me wonder, and perhaps you're wondering too, how do we truly define safety in this 21st century? Is it higher walls, better air filtration systems, a technological fortress we build to keep the wild world out? Or does true safety come from wisdom, from learning to coexist with and respect a world that we can never fully control? Which side do you lean towards? The technological fortress or wise coexistence? Please leave your thoughts. Our journey is nearing its end. We have followed the rat from the docks into the slums. We have entered the laboratory to unmask the enemy. We have seen it hide in the guise of adorable creatures. In the final part of our journey tonight, we will no longer search for it. We will confront it directly and ask the biggest question after all the wars, the disasters, the discoveries. Whose empire is it, really? Ours or its? The empire that never dies. We begin our journey tonight with a distant ambulance siren. From that sound, we followed a rat into the dark alleys of 1900 San Francisco. We entered the silence of laboratories in Hong Kong and India, witnessing great minds expose the conspiracy of an invisible enemy. We saw the truth buried by greed and prejudice, only to be unnerved by an earthquake. And finally, we saw that the enemy was not dead, but had merely changed its mask, hiding behind the adorable facade of creatures in the suburbs. A long journey, spanning a century of science, fear, and survival. So after all this, is the story of the plague in America over? Technically, perhaps it is. It's no longer an epidemic, but just a few sporadic cases, an occupational hazard for park rangers or a bit of bad luck for some campers. But Yersinia pestis, as a biological entity, may have been controlled. The plague, as an idea, a shadow in the consciousness of civilization, has never died. It lives in our very language. When you want to stay away from something, you say avoid it like the plague. The phrase has become a global idiom. It haunts the greatest works of art, from paintings of the dance of death in the Middle Ages to modern novels. It is the ultimate symbol of God's punishment, the fickleness of fate, and the collapse of society. It has become a template, an original script for all our fears of pandemics. Every time a new virus appears, we unconsciously replay the old drama, the initial panic, the search for a patient zero. the tendency to blame a nation or a race, the battle between experts and politicians, and the spread of baseless remedies online. The recent COVID-19 pandemic is the most vivid proof. We have 21st century technology, but our psychological response seems to be stuck in the 14th century. And perhaps the most terrifying legacy of the plague is not what it has done, but what humans can do with it. During the years of the Cold War, Soviet scientists succeeded in weaponizing Yersinia pestis. They created strains of the bacteria resistant to multiple antibiotics, turning them into one of the most fearsome biological weapons ever created. They had plans to be able to spread them over American cities using ballistic missiles. Think about that for a moment. The greatest horror is not a rat accidentally carrying a pathogen onto a ship. It is a human, with a brain and consciousness, intentionally placing that pathogen into a warhead. Nature created an effective killer, but only man could turn it into a tool of deliberate mass destruction. Finally, after all, the story of the plague in America is a dose of humility. It is a reminder that our empire, the empire of skyscrapers, of the internet, of transcontinental flights, is built on an incredibly fragile biological foundation. We can conquer space, but we can still be brought down by a single-celled organism. Let's think about that for a moment tonight. We have two kinds of empires on this planet. One is the empire of man, loud, brilliant, arrogant, an empire of concrete, steel, and streams of data, an empire that always believes it is the center of the universe. And there is another empire, more ancient, more patient, and vastly larger, the empire of bacteria. It has no monuments, it has no manifestos, it has only one law, to exist and to reproduce. It was here for billions of years before we appeared, and it will be here long after our cities are but ruins. Our empire may never sleep, but neither does theirs, so when the night falls, and it is just you here, alone with your own thoughts, which fear is truly keeping you awake? Is it the fear of a new pathogen, accidentally born from some distant tropical forest, a randomness of nature that we cannot control? Or is it another fear, a fear even closer to home, the fear of an old pathogen, intentionally released from a laboratory by human hands, with all their intelligence and cruelty? Do you fear the chaos of nature, or do you fear the nature of man more? Thank you for staying awake with Sleepless Mind. Now, take a deep breath, and perhaps, tomorrow night when you clean your hamster's cage, remember to wash your hands thoroughly. May you have a peaceful sleep, with dreams untroubled by invisible empires. The coming fever. So, we are at the end of the journey, or rather, at the end of its first part. We have followed an invisible empire, from the moment it set foot on the docks of San Francisco to when it found a peaceful kingdom in the wilderness. We have seen that it is not just a biological pathogen, but also a catalyst, revealing all that is best and worst in human beings, the silent sacrifice of scientists, the greed of politicians, the fear and prejudice of the crowd. The last part ended with a question about fear, the fear of a natural pathogen, or a man-made one. Tonight, I want us to go one step further. Let's assume we don't need an enemy's bioweapons laboratory. Let's assume the greatest threat doesn't come from an intentional act. Instead, it comes from a nearly perfect combination of factors we see every day. The changes in nature, the fragility of our systems, and the inherent nature of humanity. What do we do with this warning? What can we do, besides washing our hands more thoroughly after cleaning our hamster's cage? To answer that question, join me in a thought experiment, a hypothetical scenario, a plausible nightmare. Let's call it the coming fever. Act 1, the first sparks. It doesn't start with a bang. It starts with the silence of a long summer. Imagine, for 3 consecutive years, a historic drought strikes the southwestern United States. Rivers and lakes dry up. Vegetation withers. The already fragile ecosystem is under even more stress. The wild animals, the hosts of Yersinia pestis, begin to move. Colonies of prairie dogs, squirrels, and wood rats leave their arid territories, moving closer, ever closer, to where there is water and food. Those are the suburbs, the carefully irrigated golf courses, the dumpsters behind restaurants, the lush gardens of human homes. At the same time, in a small town in Arizona, a 65-year-old man is hospitalized with a high fever and cough. Doctors diagnose him with severe bacterial pneumonia. They give him broad-spectrum antibiotics, but his condition deteriorates rapidly. He dies 48 hours later, due to his advanced age and pre-existing lung conditions. His death is not considered unusual. No plague test is performed. A week later, in another county, a 10-year-old girl develops a fever after her pet cat brings home a dead squirrel. The family takes her to a clinic. The doctor notices a swollen lump in her armpit and diagnoses it as a staph infection from a scratch. The girl is prescribed a common antibiotic. Fortunately, that antibiotic also works against the plague. She recovers after a few weeks. The case is recorded as fever of unknown origin, responded well to treatment. The first 2 sparks have ignited, and they were extinguished by chance and a lack of vigilance. The system missed them. In the world of public health, these are missed index cases. They are signs that something is wrong in the animal population. The number of infected fleas is rising. The barrier between the wild world and the human one is breaking down. But no central warning system is sensitive enough to connect these 2 isolated events. Local health departments are underfunded, their staff overwhelmed with a host of other issues like long COVID or the seasonal flu. The kindling has been laid. It is just waiting for wind. Act 2. The wind of panic. The wind comes from social media. The third case is not so lucky. A healthy young man, an avid hiker, dies in a major hospital in Colorado. This time, the D-doctors managed to run the test. The result is positive for Yersinia pestis. Following procedure, the state health department and the CDC issue a public announcement. The announcement is very standard, very scientific. They reassure the public that this is an isolated case. The risk of community transmission is very low, and close contacts have been monitored and given prophylactic antibiotics. But in the world of the 21st century, that official announcement is just a drop in an ocean of information. Within hours, the story has been twisted. On Facebook, a mother in a natural living group posts, "CDC admits plague outbreak in Colorado." They're hiding the truth. The post is shared thousands of times. On Twitter, an account with a profile picture of an eagle and an American flag tweets, "Another pandemic right before the election. What a coincidence. #Plandemic2. The tweet goes viral. On YouTube, an independent researcher posts a 45-minute video with a clickbait title, "The Horrifying Secret, the Plague Isn't from Rats. It's from." The video analyzes that the government is secretly spraying some chemical over national parks, causing the disease to have an excuse to control the population. Just like Governor Gage in 1900, modern-day Gages appear everywhere. They don't need to be governors. They're influencers, people with millions of followers. They sow doubt, not for the economic benefit of a state, but for their own benefit, views, fame, and the soft power over an angry and confused crowd. Fear begins to spread, but it is not the fear of the bacterium. It is the fear of the government, the pharmaceutical companies, of each other. The psychological battle that Dr. Kenyun once faced is now amplified 1,000,000 times over by algorithms. And then, the blaming begins. Just like Chinatown in 1900, a modern Chinatown is erected. This time, the target is not a race, but a group of people. It's the hikers' fault. They bring diseases from the forest back to the city. It's the rural folks' fault. They're not clean. It's the fault of people who don't get the flu shot. Their immune systems are weak. Social cohesion begins to fracture. Act 3. Systems response. At this point, hospitals begin to notice a new phenomenon, not a sudden spike in actual plague cases, but an explosion of the worried well. Anyone with a fever, a cough, or even just a pimple rushes to the emergency room, demanding a plague test. The healthcare system, already strained, becomes even more overwhelmed. Doctors and nurses are exhausted. Test kits are quickly depleted, and a new problem arises that few had considered: the antibiotic supply chain. Drugs like doxycycline, the main weapon against the plague, are not always available in large quantities. They are manufactured in a few places around the world. The sudden surge in demand due to panic causes the supply to become scarce. The government faces a difficult decision: how to distribute the medicine. Only to confirmed cases, or also to those at high risk? And who is considered high risk? An ethical and logistical debate erupts. In this chaos, a few real cases, people who truly need help, might be overlooked, their diagnoses delayed, and they pay the price with their lives. The nightmare is not a pandemic that kills millions. The nightmare of the 21st century is a few treatable cases, amplified by panic and misinformation, causing a chain collapse of a system we once believed was robust. So, what do we do? How do we respond to a coming fever? The answer doesn't lie in a single pill. It lies in building a social immune system, and that immune system has 3 main components. First component, building information immunity. This is the first line of defense, and it lies in the hands of each of us. In a world flooded with information, the most important skill is not reception, but filtration. We need to learn to be conscious consumers of information. What does that mean? It means that when you read a shocking headline, pause for a second before hitting the share button. Ask yourself, where is this from? Who is the author? Do they have expertise in this field? What might be their motive? Is this information verified by other mainstream sources? It means we must accept an uncomfortable truth. The world is complex. There will be no simple answers, no single villain to blame for every problem. Resisting the temptation of simple narratives is the most effective vaccine for the mind. Second component, repairing fractured trust. The confrontation between Kenyun and Gage in 1900 showed the deadly cost of broken trust between science, government, and the public. Trust, once lost, is incredibly difficult to rebuild. This requires change from both sides. For scientists and health agencies, they need to communicate more transparently, clearly, and humbly. They need to explain to the public not just what, but why, and most importantly, they need to admit that science is a process. Knowledge changes, and advice may change as more data becomes available. Transparency about uncertainty, ironically, builds more trust than dogmatic certainty. For us, the public, we need to understand that scientists are also human. They are not prophets. Believing in science doesn't mean believing blindly. It means believing in the method of evidence, of peer review, of constant testing and self-correction. And the third, and most important component, strengthening community cohesion. The failed quarantine of Chinatown in 1900 is a costly lesson. An isolated, stigmatized community becomes a weak point in the epidemic defense system, not a solution. The strongest immune system of a society is not barbed wire fences, but the bonds between people. It's checking in on your elderly neighbor who lives alone. It's sharing a verified article from the CDC in your family group chat. Instead of a baseless rumor, it's gently correcting a friend who is spreading misinformation, not to attack them, but to help them see the issue. In a crisis, empathy and cooperation are the most precious resources. And in the end, after a long journey through besieged cities, through lonely laboratories, through firestorms and invisible fears, we realize that this story is not a call for fear. Fear, after all, is just a prison. It paralyzes us. It slams shut the doors of thought. No, this is a different kind of call. A call for awareness and preparation. But when I say the word preparation, what does your mind perhaps envision? Cellars filled with canned goods? Complex evacuation plans? No, the preparation we truly need, the only preparation that can face an ever-changing enemy, is not a physical preparation. It is a mental preparation. The empire of bacteria, as we've said, never sleeps. It is always evolving, always searching for weaknesses in our defense systems. And after all that we've seen, perhaps you would agree with me that the greatest weakness of the human empire does not lie in technology or biology. It lies here, in the very way we treat each other, and in the way we treat the truth. Perhaps the best preparation for the next nightmare is not to stockpile goods, but to cultivate wisdom. The night is late. I know these questions are not easy to answer. They require us to look deep within ourselves, into the society we live in. They might make you feel small, helpless, but I believe that the very act of daring to sit here together in the night, facing these uncomfortable questions, is the first step of preparation. Thank you for taking the time to ponder with me. May you have a peaceful sleep and wake up tomorrow with a clearer mind. Thank you for staying awake with Sleepless Mind. May you have a peaceful sleep and wake up tomorrow with a clearer mind, with a You've crossed the story. You felt every pulse in the dark, and I was there with you, quietly, always. That's why I left behind one last thing. Not to explain, not to impress, just to stay with you a little longer. A song I chose with care, as if tucking you in from across time and space. So go on, lay back, the music knows where to take you. If you're still here, then you're something rare. Not many stay this long. So, thank you for choosing to stay. I'm here too, still awake, surrounded by the quiet glow of my editing screen, shaping the next stories just for you. If there's anything you want to leave behind, a whisper, a suggestion, even just a symbol, drop it in the comments. Because maybe, tomorrow night, you'll hear yourself echoed in a story that's never been told before. still here, even now? I have a feeling part of you is still wandering somewhere between wakefulness and dreaming. I know that feeling well because I'm still awake with you. In a quiet room, I'm gently laying out layers of sound, each breath, each beat, preparing the next journey we'll take together. If you're still listening, leave me a sign. Let me know how you're feeling or just where you are in this vast world. Because right now, in this stillness, you are not alone. You're still there, aren't you? I can't see you, but I can feel you. Like a soft signal pulsing across the silence. Over here, I'm still working, refining layers of sound, rewriting fragments of voice, building the landscape for our next adventure. One that you might inspire. If an idea comes to you, share it with me. Comment below. A theme, a memory, a strange dream. I read every word because I never tell these stories alone. I tell them with you.